So walk me through that and give me your thoughts.
Sure, happy to. I just want to, maybe I'm being pedantic here, but I do
No, and we'll pull out the G.R. thesaurus for pedantic, so we can,
I'm being overly picky on words, okay? But I do want to, you characterize the combination as a merger, and I just want to be clarifying that. Because the ISO is a nonprofit public benefit corporation. And we have participating, we have participating transmission owners. Essentially, they're members of the ISO as a kind of club. And in that club, we have nonprofit and we have for-profit. We have three of the largest utilities in the country, PG&E, SoCal Edison, and SDG&E, as members of this club. They're all run for-profit. But the ISO operates on a nonprofit basis. And so PacifiCorp will be joining on that same basis. They would become a participating transmission owner. And so I don't know that there's necessarily an inconsistency on the for-profit versus
well, there's not, because they're investor-owned utilities, and you're right, they're similar, so it is apples to apples, but their core utility mix
is heavy on coal.
Dramatically different.
Yes.
I understand what you're explaining to me with regards to the governance structure and the fiduciary responsibility of being a publicly traded company.
Right.
That's apples to apples.
Yeah.
The utility mix in itself is completely upside down and opposite in comparison to the three largest IOUs in California.
Right, right. And I think that the issue here, again, as I said earlier, importation of energy from PacifiCorp into California would be subject to a carbon price adder. And it is so part of cap and trade. And so it's not impossible, but it's highly unlikely, given the economics, that we would be importing coal-driven energy into California. Now
but do you understand? May I just let me interrupt? That's what makes me nervous. It's not likely, and not likely doesn't give me a sense of reassurance statutorily, that going back to some of my earlier concerns, that California's climate change leadership will not be undermined as a result. So the not likely makes me very nervous.
Right. Well, I'm a mathematician. I talk in probability. So it's hard to believe, but it is a possibility. Okay, and that so that is undoubtedly an issue that ultimately, as I said, the legislature needs to get comfortable with. There is the flip side of that, which is if again PacifiCorp or any other participating member that joins from another state, if they see a ready market for renewable energy in California, and they are now part of the footprint, so that they can be called upon to sell energy into the market on a regular basis, that's going to create incentives for investors to build renewable energy in those other areas. And I think that's an enormous benefit, because while there's still great renewable resources here in California, we have, in many cases, picked the low-hanging fruit, and there's plenty of low-hanging fruit in other states. So the expectation I would have around this is that the carbon price adder will block effectively, again, one would expect, the importation of coal, and create an incentive for the creation of new renewable resources in those areas. It's interesting that some of the areas of the country that have some of the biggest coal reserves also have some of the best wind. This is high quality, consistently blowing, and so on. Transmission lines exist, right? Ready market in California is going to create the incentive to build these facilities, I believe. And in that way, effectively, we will be helping to speed along what we all want to see, which is I think, a movement away from fossil fuels into clean energy.
Mr. Farron, let's talk about, bless you. Let's talk about the governance structure and how do you, as a commissioner, envision this governance structure? Does California maintain, given we're the sixth largest economy on this planet, given that we have a population of 40 million, given that I believe it's either Wyoming or I think the city of Sacramento has a larger population than one of the states in question. Who's in charge?
I mean, that is actually probably the most important question. How do we, what are the structures that we need to put in place, and how does this operate? And when we met earlier today, I left you with a document. I'm sure you've been very busy.
I haven't had a chance to read it, but I do thank you, and I will read it.
But what that document represents, just for the rest of the folks here, is that we have had multiple workshops and discussions around this issue of governance. How do you put together a board which is independent, meaning doesn't have a financial interest in any of the industries and so on, and represents the interests of a diverse group of different constituents outside of the state of California as well as inside? And that document lays out some general principles, which is what we heard collectively from other people. We said, what are the important things? There were four, I'd say, quasi-academic papers presented that laid out different types of structures. And what we've tried to do is condense those down into some key principles that we think need to go into the governance structure. And we don't have all the answers. We have asked, in fact, we presented this a few weeks ago. We had a workshop here in Sacramento, and then we repeated the workshop. This was on the 16th of June. We repeated it again the 20th of June in Denver, and we've asked people to give us their responses. What do they like? What do they not like? What will work? What won't work? And so on. And I think out of that process, we'll have a better feel for what collectively across these different constituents in California, outside of California, what we think will work. But ultimately, it will come down to you in the legislature as to whether whatever this proposed structure looks like, whether it passes muster. And I'm happy to go through the various components of that if you'd like.
Of the principles.
Yeah.
Well, not right now, but let me ask you. So what I'm hearing from you is there's no really conclusion who's in charge, that you're getting testimony, you're having these stakeholder meetings, quasi-qualitative research groups, focus groups, of receiving input from folks.
Yeah, I would say there are a couple of broad themes that are emerging. Okay, one is an independent board. Okay, which would be, and it's not yet been decided how that board is appointed, and how many members are representative from different states and the like. But the notion is that there would be an independent board, and then secondly, that there would be a body of state regulators that would stand alongside of the board, looking out explicitly for the interests of the various states. And that issues that are probably, I should really start off by saying the first principle in this is the preservation of state authority over their own climate policy and procurement. That's number one in the principles. So that would be clear in the bylaws that California laws related to renewable energy, renewable portfolio standard are inviolate, that the ISO would have no ability to impact those, and in fact would be charged with respecting those. So that's absolutely number one in these principles. And then I can go into the various structures of how this body of state regulators and the board would work together and how they would hash out their responsibilities. That's kind of getting into
It's not necessary right now, but I do like what you just said right now. Let's try to extrapolate. I know it's based on, I don't know if it's based on pure conjecture or conversations that you have had at these forums in Denver and elsewhere. What do you think other governors of other states are feeling with regards to the governance structure?
Well, there's this phenomenon which they refer to as California phobia. I think there is concern about how this will all work with California. I mean, I think there's a recognition that California built and paid for the ISO, and the ISO is, you can think of it as a lot of things, but it really is an amazing technology company. We have this optimization software that allows you to second by second optimize the flow of power across 25,000 miles of transmission lines. It's really an amazing piece of work. And that's an asset which, it's recognized an asset that California should rightly have a benefit associated with that. It's also recognized that California represents the majority of the load, as you said earlier, majority of the population and so on. So I think that's recognized. The question is, how is that balanced? If you're sitting in another state, how do I ensure that I get my interests looked after versus the 800-pound gorilla from California? So, but it's interesting. I think there is a recognition that the benefits are coming really from a very geeky technical optimization. We're squeezing out inefficiencies in the system. Right now, the grid in certain parts of the West is operated essentially using a telephone system, right? Looks like power is going to be higher than we expected. They make a phone call, turn up, shovel in some more fuel, off we go. And that's completely different than how we operate things in California, where there's automatic sensors and the market which operates not only does projections for weather patterns and demand and production from renewables a day ahead, a week ahead, but it also fine-tunes it on a 5-minute by 5-minute basis. Much more sophisticated. And just implementing that system in these states is going to have enormous benefit to them. And I think they recognize that. But I will say this, there is a risk here, which is, as I said earlier, there are 4 other ISOs that operate multi-state in the United States. And they are having conversations with the same utilities that are interested in participating in the EIM and in joining the ISO.
The energy imbalance market.
Yeah. So it would not surprise me to see some utilities in the West link up with an ISO in the Midwest or in the South or in the East Coast, even though they're not physically connected at all, because they'll get this benefit from this optimization software that they have. Now, I think the California software is better. But if so if you're sitting in a state and you're saying, dealing with California is too big a headache, there's already a multi-state program out there, and it does the job. I think there's a real risk there, and these are the sorts of things that potentially could spread as one company does it, its neighbor does, and so on. And I'm concerned about California becoming isolated as a result of that.
I agree theoretically, and I think we all concur that having a statement of principles, overarching goals that we want to accomplish, and making sure we do it the right way is absolutely critical. Per Senate Bill 350, obviously there has to be a study conducted. That study's been delayed.
Well, the preliminary results have been published. Initially, I think there were comments on early drafts, and so they went back and did more scenario analysis and so on. But the first version of the study was released May 24th.
And when do we have the complete study?
Well, we're taking comments, and so we're doing additional analysis. I don't know the exact time frame, but I think the economic study is pretty much been put to bed. Okay. There may still be some outstanding questions. But.
And obviously, CalISO is in charge of the study.
That's right.
Now, what do you believe about independent review of the study itself?
Personally, I welcome it. I mean, I think we engaged 4 respected consulting firms who have different areas of expertise. And, did they get it all 100% right? Don't know. Happy to have another set of eyes have a look at that.
So I'm clear, personally, as Mark Fern, the citizen of California, United States citizen, or professionally as a Cal ISO commissioner, you would welcome an independent review from an outside group of the Cal ISO study.
Well, I think this is, if the legislature feels that the study needs to have an independent review on it, I would certainly support that.
Okay. We have Ms. Leyva, who has joined us right now, and I know she was busy in numerous committees right now. When we go to Ms. Leyva right now.
Thank you, Mr. Pro Tem. I do apologize for being late. I enjoyed our meeting. A lot of the things that we covered, you have covered more in depth with Mr. Pro Tem, so I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Leyva. Let's go to any questions or comments from members. Mr. Vice Chair.
Follow-up question. So we've talked about a lot of other things, but what do you think the biggest challenge facing the grid is? Just on a day-to-day management, what's the biggest challenge facing the grid in California?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is renewable integration.
It's what?
Renewable integration, okay?
So we have all these renewables that are pumping out energy, and how do we use it? Is that the concern?
Yeah, again, the issue is, you have to balance down to the second in the location where the demand is to get the supply there. And so, not always, the sun isn't always shining where people are consuming it, and especially at night. And so there's that is right now that's an issue. I mean, there are a couple of pieces to this. One is, as I mentioned earlier, the oversupply in the middle of the day during the spring. That's energy which is wasted and thrown away, and to some extent wreaks havoc with the financials associated with investing in that. And then the big thing is the afternoon ramp, meaning as the sun sets and solar comes off, people go home, they turn on their TVs and their lights, and there's a big surge in electricity use during that period. And so ensuring that we have adequate resources in the right location to meet that's probably the biggest.
So part of our issue, as I understand it, is we have, the renewables that hit at a certain time, and then something happens, and you have to have plants that kind of come online very quickly that can, kind of fill that void. So once Diablo Canyon closes, what kind of an impact is that going to have?
Well, the analysis that was done, the studies we talked about earlier, assumed that Diablo Canyon would be retired in, I think, 2025, according to its existing lifespan. So I think, unlike San Onofre, which went off without any warning, really, and really occupied a key position in the LA basin and was key to making the electricity system work, basically acted as a magnet to pull in electricity into the region. Diablo Canyon doesn't have those features. We know we've got several years to address it, but even if we didn't, it's in a location which is not as sensitive, and so I feel pretty confident that we can replace that with clean energy.
Okay, and so I know there's a lot of talk on the regionalization. As we discussed, that's up to the legislature whether we want to do it. I think you said, I asked you if you supported it, and you said, well, it depends on the governance structure. So a lot of the things that we're talking about today, but isn't part of the pros of regionalization is that, as you said, when we produce all this renewable, right now we're paying people to take it. Maybe we can, get a profit from that. It could be sold out to other folks, but also it will help us with our imbalance as well, right?
Yes.
So, because as I understand it, talking to some of the folks at ISO, there's times when you're just, white knuckling it, like, well, we're so close to not being able to meet our demand. So that would give us the ability, until, look, I'd like to build everything in California. I'd like California workers to make the money on it. I'd like to have it all here, but that's going to take some time, and I think we're going to continue to invest in that. But just from an operator, we need to expand the footprint a little bit just to have less of those moments when we don't know if we're going to make it, right?
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. But you mentioned jobs, and I think that's a really important point. Moving to 50% renewable is a very stimulative exercise. Again, these studies say it'll generate somewhere between 90 and 100,000 jobs. About 40% of those will be direct, and about 60% will be indirect. So as workers are employed and they spend their money, that will circulate in the economy. And so I think there's a jobs component to the 50% renewable. And interestingly enough, when you look at a regionalization structure, it actually generates more jobs because it's cheaper to consumers. It, again, generates savings on investment that you wouldn't otherwise need, and that in turn stimulates the economy and leads to a higher level of jobs.
And as far as, I think.
In California.
Sure. I think you've said you're environmentalists, you support SB 350, you support 50% renewable, but in your job as an ISO board member, it really doesn't matter, right? You can't say as a board member, well, I know we have a need, but I don't like natural gas, so we're going to go over here and we're going to get this, right? You have to use what's out there to manage the grid, correct?
Yeah, sometimes we've been characterized as the physics police.
Yeah.
Right. We just need to make sure that the system operates properly. But I mean, the ISO has been thinking for some time now about what does the grid look like when you go from 20% to 25 to 30 to 50. And as Senator De Leon said earlier, in fact, last month, there was a day where we were running at 56% renewable energy in California. I mean, it's happening now. The challenge is how
Were you able to use it all?
Oh, yeah. The issue, actually, I don't know about that day, how much was overgenerated,
Seems like it's always overgenerated, so.
well, it depends upon the weather pattern. I mean, on a hot day like this, sun, that's great. That helps run the air conditioning, but when it's cool, not so much. No, the challenge is going to be how do you do that consistently over the whole course of the year? And that's what we're thinking about. What do you need the grid to be? How can you make the grid flexible? We've created some new instruments that create a market for flexible attributes. So if you have a facility that can produce a surge in power over a period of time, we're trying to create a market that will pay you for that surge. And this is really important when you think about storage. I mean, storage is one of the holy grails out there. But right now it's very expensive. And if we can come up with ways of creating a market for the attributes that storage has, and it has some 13 different qualities that it can provide to the grid, more revenue streams for that, for storage effectively makes storage cheaper, which means you'll have more of it, which means it'll add more benefit to the grid, which means you can absorb more renewables and so on. And that's something the ISO is not even thinking about, has implemented some new policies.
Do you, the departments, I think sometimes we get critical of how the CPUC and the ISO and the CEC work together because it doesn't seem like you work together. In fact, when you try to work together, you get punished for it, which is unfortunate. So can there be better coordination between the various groups to make sure that, we're all on the same page?
Well, I think the coordination has improved a lot. When I joined the PUC, I remember coming to the ISO, and I was actually it was the Energy Commission, and I remember someone said, "This is the first time that a sitting commissioner from the PUC has ever come to the Energy Commission," which I thought was odd. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think there's good cooperation at the top. Doesn't always filter down through organizations. In my experience, it takes a lot of management attention to kind of zipper up a couple of organizations all the way top to bottom. And I don't think we're there yet. There's definitely more work that can be done.
Okay. And as far as the regionalization, again, understand that's under the purview of the legislature. What is the time frame before we will see all the studies and then have the information to make a decision? Do we have a time frame for this?
Well, my understanding is that the timetable is we're approaching the end of the process around the studies and the like. As I mentioned, there's this proposal, the 8-point proposal on governance. That's gone out for comment. We're asking for comments back on July 7th.
Okay.
That will be turned into some kind of recommendation, I would imagine, in the next few weeks after that. So we're moving as quickly as I think we can safely. And So I would say we're weeks away from the end of that phase.
Okay. Then last question, as far as an operator, again, regardless of your personal views, are you concerned as an operator that a lot of these older, large power plants that are large scale are being shut down and a lot of times, if they're replaced, are being replaced with smaller power plants? Is that, from an operation standpoint, does that concern you?
You know, it isn't the scale, it's the attributes that the plants have. So the difference between having high penetration of renewables, what you need there is a different kind of plant. You need nimbleness. You need something which can move quickly. This afternoon ramp I talked about. And typically older plants like that, they don't have that capability. They're designed to run 24/7 at high efficiency rates and so on. They can be run more variable, but that typically is more expensive and creates more pollution. And so it's going to be a difficult issue because there's a considerable fleet of generators which the owners are going to need to face a decision. Do they retrofit them to make them more nimble and more cost effective and less polluting to operate in this new way? Or, do they abandon them or take them to somewhere else where they might have some residual value? So
you're not concerned? You think we're going to be able to provide power? There's no issues with kind of the trend that's happening out there?
Well, absent any surprises, I mean, we do plan the transmission grid, we plan the daily operation of the market, assuming that a certain series of things, bad things happen. Aliso Canyon is an example of that. I don't know that was necessarily on anyone's radar that the degree of our dependency to that natural gas field was. We learned that kind of in real time, so absent something like that, I feel pretty confident that.
Okay, and then with this recent heat wave, I mean, how are we doing? Are we close, or we got a pretty good buffer in there?
Well, I think we made through the first wave of the heat wave. You described it as white knuckle time. I think we've got adequate resources there. As I mentioned earlier, Aliso Canyon does add a layer of complexity here because Southern California, that's the go-to power supply, and we're trying to not tap into that because we don't want to create even worse problems in the winter when the demand for natural gas for heating begins to kick in. Heating has first call over electricity generation. So again, touch wood, I hope we'll be able to work our way through this.
Well, and I'm glad that we're moving towards more renewables. I think that's great. I think it's created a lot of jobs in California. But the fastest way to get people to not support that is for us to have an energy crisis. So let's make sure that doesn't happen.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I just have two last questions, and we'll wind this down. On the issue of transparency, we know that Senate Bill 350 legally requires that all modeling and assumptions be made available to the public. It has been brought to my attention, and you can comment, and I know we have some board members here, staff members from CalISO, that none of the modeling or assumptions have been made public. In fact, that they have purposefully denied individuals access to any of the modeling and assumptions. And I think the modeling and assumptions are very, very important to review and analyze because, as we all know, we all felt the impact of one of the worst decisions in the history of California, the deregulation of the electricity market. And as a result of decisions that were made, in this House, in this dome with the governor and others, we had one of the worst energy crises in the history of the nation. You had 250% markup in utility rates. A lot of pain was brought to senior citizens, to communities of color, low-income families, small businesses, working families, and you had probably one of the largest transfers of wealth in the history of California.
Yeah. Well, on the issue of transparency, I I'm a little surprised that's an accusation, because I think the models are certainly available, the assumptions are available, and we have tried to, I believe, tried to run a transparent process around that. There are some of the detailed calculations and spreadsheets and things are subject to a non-disclosure agreement because they do have confidential information in relation to some critical infrastructure. And so we do require people who want access to that data to sign an NDA. I personally signed an NDA and I got access within a few hours. So I think the ISO staff have tried to do as good a job as they can to provide the information when people ask for it. I've seen a list, it's probably 80 pages long, of questions from different parties about modeling assumptions and all, alternative scenarios and so on. And again, I would be very upset if there are instances where the staff of the ISO are not responsive to that. What I've seen is I've seen the full Q&A, and if there are outstanding questions that people are not getting satisfactory answers to, I would certainly do my best to help.
Let's definitely follow up. I want to ask the Senate Rules Committee staff to follow up with Mr. Farron specifically, as well as the CalISO staff, but I want the conduit to be specifically Mr. Farron with regards to the, I don't want to say allegations or accusations, but, the charges of the lack of transparency, ensuring modeling and assumptions, which is very, very important, because we cannot have, and I say this respectfully, but I say this honestly and openly, you cannot have staff driving really critical decisions with PacifiCorp and shareholders in mind to dealing with what is potentially a huge monumental paradigm shift in California. I think Republicans and Democrats alike have the overarching goals that if this were to come to fruition in the future, because I don't think anyone in particular that I know of, at least on this committee, are in opposition to the idea, to the concept of regionalization. One, we reduce greenhouse gases and protect our climate change leadership. Two, we reduce utility rates for our consumers in California. Three, economic growth for California. Economic growth for the whole region in particular, but not at the cost of jobs here in California. And I can go on and on and on. If we hit the check box on all of these overarching concerns, I think we could be in the ballpark, definitely, of accomplishing something that's huge. You said this earlier in your own statement. It can go the other way too, and it can be severely costly to the state of California as well as to others. One last question that I have is my understanding, it's been brought to me here, that the state of Iowa is considering an increase in the production tax charged on wind-generated electricity. If that were to come to fruition, and Wyoming, like you said, has some of the best wind in the nation, and they're also a large exporter of dirty fossil fuel coal. If they increase their production tax on wind-generated electricity, is the California taxpayer going to be captive to the increased tax and the transmission costs as a result of the regionalization of the grid?
Well, it's interesting. I think you're talking about Idaho?
Wyoming, in this case.
Wyoming,
But it could be in other states too.
It could be any state.
Yeah.
Again, as an economist, if you put a tax on exports, it increases the cost of the exports. So what that would mean is it would mean that wind, which at the margin might be the cheapest resource, may flip and no longer be the cheapest resource. And there is a gain. The difference between the cheapest resource and the next cheapest resource is would be lost to the people of whatever state put the tax on. So again, it's conceivable, but it strikes me as somewhat counterproductive if the goal is,
It's counterproductive through a perspective of an economist, which you are,
Right.
trained as an economist. But
Right.
it's not counterproductive or unrealistic through an elected official's perspective.
yeah, I mean.
Two different things. Economy and the theories of economy are two different things,
Yeah,
macro,
and there
micro.
is a point where if you put a tax which isn't too high but sufficiently high, you'll generate revenue and you'll continue to sell the volume. And effectively what happens is that is that cost, I mean, you raise a question, how, the ultimate consumer is going to pay the cost of that tax. So in your example, that would mean that wind from that particular state would be more expensive than it would have been otherwise. If it turns out to be the cheapest source anyway, then the consumer is still better off than the alternative. But of course, some of the value it would have realized has wound up in the coffers of
Well, it's
the other
diminished.
state government.
It is diminished for any other state, particularly states that don't believe in California's climate change leadership and policies, start to see an opportunity to build up their own state budget coffers in terms of what they may be exporting to the largest consumer of energy. Well, I don't know if we're the largest consumer of energy. Actually, our per capita use of energy has fallen quite dramatically, precisely because of our energy efficiency and renewable policies in California. We actually, on a per capita use less energy than any other state in the nation. In fact, I would argue that our utility rates for our residential customers are among the lowest in the nation. Now, business, it's a little different here with regards to business and the industries, no doubt about it. But when it comes to residential, we have among the lowest. But that's a direct result of the progress that we have made statutorily through policies, through the legislature, and working closely with the executive branch. So that's another concern too, Mr. Farron, with regards to what other state bodies will do and whatever abilities they have to export whatever type of energy that they generate from their respective states to California. Why don't we do this right now? For those who are in support of Mr. Farron's confirmation or at least approval on the Senate Rules Committee, come on up. For those who are in support, I'm going to ask folks to abbreviate perhaps what it would be, long-winded comments, no pun intended, for Duncan Federich, But I would ask you to just, give a quick synopsis, who you are, what you represent, and an adjective or two how great Mr. Farron is.